Welcome to the New Mexico Workers' Compensation video on the healthcare provider selection process. We hope you find it helpful. In the New Mexico Workers' Compensation system, choosing a healthcare provider, or HCP, after a workplace injury must follow a specific process. This video will take you through that process. New Mexico Statute 52149 states that after an injury and subject to the requirements of the Workers' Compensation Act, an employer shall provide the worker with reasonable and necessary care from a healthcare provider. This should happen in a timely manner. What if the accident is an emergency? In that case, get immediate medical care. Using an HCP in an emergency does not count as a selection of the HCP. However, a referral from an HCP who provided emergency care is considered a selection of an HCP. So if an emergency room doctor refers an injured worker to a specific doctor for further treatment, and the worker sees that referral doctor, that is considered an HCP selection. In New Mexico, the employer either initially selects the HCP for the injured worker or permits the injured worker to make the selection. Employers should let workers know in writing of their decision on HCP selection, preferably before an injury occurs. What happens if the employer doesn't notify workers in writing of their HCP selection? Ask your employer. If your employer tells you to see a specific HCP, you should see that healthcare provider, except for if it's an emergency, because then it may not be possible to see the selected provider. When an injury takes place, the worker and employer should fill out a WCA Notice of Accident form to record the specifics of the injury. When that form is filled out, the employer can indicate if the worker will make the first selection, and if the worker does not make that first selection, the employer should direct the injured worker to the employer's choice of healthcare provider. Once the selection of an HCP has taken place, that selection is in place for the first 60 days from the date the worker receives treatment from the initially selected HCP. The party that did not make the first selection may change the HCP after 60 days. This can be done by filling out a Notice of Change of HCP form and submitting it to the other party. The form can be submitted as early as the 50th day after the beginning of treatment. Find the form on the WCA's website under the Forms tab. What if the party wants to keep the selected HCP and objects to the change of provider? That party can file a healthcare provider disagreement form with the WCA's clerk of the court. This form is also found on the WCA website under the Forms tab. The objection form must be filed within 3 days of receipt of the change notice. Then a hearing will take place before a WCA judge within 7 days of receipt of the objection form. If you have any questions about the forms and how to fill them out, contact a WCA ombudsman. The healthcare provider disagreement form also includes an option to request to change an HCP. However, the party filing for the change must show that the treating HCP is not able to provide reasonable and necessary medical care to the injured worker. Here are some examples of where an HCP selection may be disputed. Sometimes a party will dispute whether or not the medical care is reasonable and/or necessary, or the date at which an injured worker's maximum medical improvement, or MMI, was reached, or the correct impairment rating for the worker. The impairment rating has to do with an injury's physical restrictions on the injured worker and their ability to perform their work. Or a dispute could also arise for medical reasons, such as whether or not the injury occurred on the job. In any of those cases, Either party has the right to file a request for an independent medical examination, or IME, and have the dispute heard before a workers' compensation judge. We hope this video helped in your understanding of the healthcare provider selection process for the treatment of workers' compensation injuries in New Mexico. If you have any other questions or concerns about this process or any other aspect of workers' compensation, please call our Ombudsman hotline at 1-866-967-5667. There is no charge for an Ombudsman's services, and they can help you through the workers' compensation process.